I met Juvie. I met Turk. Shout out to Turk, you little bitch. You ain't here, but you. We gon' with you and we won't you. You heard me? Don't go off script. We gon' with that bitch we want. But that's another movie. But ain't no, cash money. When one died, I ain't gonna say died, cause we lost a lot of soldiers. But cash money ain't built on. You leave, you can't, we gon' still multiply. Let's go. Cash money ain't gon' never die. As long as I'm alive, hold on, fresh, wait, fresh. Long as I'm alive, cash money ain't gon' never die.
The moment Birdman stood on that Las Vegas stage during the Cash Money vs. No Limit versus and called out Turk, calling him a little bitch in front of thousands, it wasn't just another rap beef flaring up. It was the latest chapter in a story that's been brewing for decades. A story about money, loyalty, power, and what happens when the dreams of young men from the projects collide with the harsh realities of the music industry. To understand what happened that night in October, you have to go back to the beginning, to early 90s, New Orleans, to the Magnolia Projects, where brothers Brian and Ronald Williams were looking for a way out. They'd seen the streets claim too many people they loved. They'd lived through an era when New Orleans had one of the highest murder rates in America, and they'd watched Master P build No Limit Records into an empire, proving that New Orleans rappers could dominate nationally without leaving their city behind or signing away their futures to major labels in New York or Los Angeles. Cash Money Records started in 1991, initially focusing on bounce music, that uniquely New Orleans sound that made the city's clubs shake. But the Williams brothers, who everyone knew as Birdman and Slim, they had bigger vision. They convinced Manny Fresh, an already established producer in the city, to become their in-house beatmaker. And then they started finding young talent, kids from the same neighborhoods they came from, kids who were hungry and talented and desperate for a way up. By the mid-90s, they'd assembled something special. Juvenile, the oldest and most experienced. BG, who had that smooth flow and street credibility. Lil Wayne, who was only 13 when he signed but already showed flashes of the genius he'd become. And Turk, the grittiest of them all, with that raw delivery that captured what life was really like in the Magnolia. Together, they were the Hot Boys, and they represented everything Cash Money stood for. But the real breakthrough came in 1998. That's when Cash Money signed a $30 million distribution deal with Universal Records, and it wasn't just any deal. While most independent labels were lucky to get a 50-50 split with major labels, Cash Money negotiated an 80-20 split in their favor. They kept all their masters. They got a $2 million annual advance. Birdman would later say that Universal underestimated them. Didn't think they'd do what they did, but they did. They took over. Juvenile's Back That Ass Up became a cultural phenomenon. The Hot Boys' Guerrilla Warfare album hit number 5 on the Billboard 200. DG literally coined the term bling bling, which ended up in the dictionary. Lil Wayne was transforming before everyone's eyes from a talented kid into a wordplay wizard. And by the end of 1999, Cash Money had 4 albums simultaneously in the Billboard Top 20. New Orleans wasn't just on the map. New Orleans was the map. But there was always another side to this success story. A darker side that people didn't talk about as much when the hits were dropping and the money was flowing. Cash Money had a reputation. Artists started coming forward with complaints about not getting paid. Manny Fresh, the producer who'd crafted the entire Cash Money sound, left the label over financial disputes. Juvenile left. BG left. Turk left. All of them citing the same issue: money. The pattern was always similar. Young artists, often teenagers, would sign deals they didn't fully understand. Cash Money would blow them up, make them stars. But when it came time to get paid, when it came time to see the royalties from all those platinum albums and sold-out shows, the artist would hit walls. Legal battles would ensue. Settlements would be reached behind closed doors. And the cycle would continue with the next generation of talent. Lil Wayne, the biggest star Cash Money ever produced, the one who brought Drake and Nicki Minaj into the fold through his Young Money imprint, even he ended up suing. In 2015, he filed a $51 million lawsuit against Birdman and Cash Money. The beef got so bad that Lil Wayne was publicly saying he wanted off the label, calling for the release of his long-delayed Carter 5 album. It took years to resolve, but eventually, Wayne got his freedom in an 8-figure settlement. Turk's journey through all of this was particularly complicated. Unlike Juvenile, who achieved massive solo success, or Lil Wayne, who became one of the biggest rappers alive. Turk's career took a different path. His solo album, Young and Tuggin', in 2001 showed promise. But just a few years later, in 2004, his life took a devastating turn. Police came to execute a search warrant at his home. Shots were fired. 2 officers were wounded. Turk went to prison for nearly 9 years. When he got out in 2012, the music industry had changed dramatically. His former groupmates had all gone their separate ways. BG was in prison on a 14-year sentence. Juvenile was doing his own thing. Lil Wayne was the biggest rapper in the world. And Turk was trying to rebuild a career from scratch, carrying the weight of his past and trying to find his place in a culture that had moved on without him. The reunion talk started bubbling around 2023, when BG was released from prison. Birdman publicly said he'd invest $100 million of his own money into a Hot Boys reunion tour. But there was a telling detail in how he talked about it. When asked why Turk didn't get the same red carpet treatment as BG when he was released from prison, Birdman was dismissive. He said they didn't have a relationship when Turk went to prison. The message was clear. Turk wasn't a priority. Still, reunions started happening. Small ones at first. A surprise appearance here, a festival performance there. Fans were excited. The nostalgia was real. These were the guys who'd defined an era, who'd put New Orleans hip-hop on the international stage. At Lil Louisiana Fest, in November 2024, all 4 Hot Boys finally performed together for the first time in over 15 years. It felt historic. It felt healing. But behind the scenes, tensions were building. BG started making comments about Turk that were harsh even by rap beef standards. He compared Turk to LaToya Luckett and Michelle Williams from Destiny's Child, suggesting that a Hot Boys reunion could work without him, but wouldn't work without the other 3 members. It was a calculated insult, positioning Turk as the least essential member of the group. The tension exploded around the Cash Money 30th anniversary tour that was planned for summer 2024. Turk had signed a contract. He'd agreed to perform, but according to him and his wife manager, problems emerged when promoters tried to reduce his payment. The Nashville show got canceled. Promoters claimed it was because they couldn't pay the artists. When they approached Turk about taking less money for the remaining shows in Cleveland, Chicago, and Detroit, he refused. He had a contract. He'd agreed to a number, and he wasn't going to accept less. What happened next is where things get murky. Turk received a termination notice, but the reason given wasn't about money. Instead, he was labeled a security risk. The promoters cited his online beef with BG as the justification, but as Turk pointed out, he and BG had already performed together multiple times on the tour without any incident. The security risk excuse, he argued, was just a cover for a financial dispute. They didn't want to admit they couldn't pay him what they'd promised, so they came up with another reason to kick him off. Turk filed a lawsuit seeking the $340,000 he said he was still owed from a $400,000 deal. His legal team issued cease and desist letters. He went on Instagram Live and YouTube with his wife to tell their side of the story, and he made sure people understood something crucial. Cash Money Records itself wasn't paying him. He was booked like any other artist through promoters and booking agents. The label didn't control this situation. Juvenile, caught in the middle, expressed sympathy for Turk. He told media outlets that he had no issues with his own payment for the tour, and that he'd actually fought to get Turk included. But ultimately, he said, the higher-ups made decisions that were out of his control. It was an awkward position for someone who'd been through his own battles with Cash Money and understood the business side better than most. Meanwhile, tensions between Turk and BG continued escalating. BG released a diss track called Hands Up, aimed at Turk. The two went back and forth on social media. It was ugly in the way these things always are, when ego and pride and money and old friendships all collide at once. Which brings us to that night in Las Vegas on October 25, 2024. Verzuz was making its grand return after a 3-year hiatus, and they'd chosen the perfect matchup: Cash Money versus No Limit. Two New Orleans labels that had dominated the late 90s and early 2000s. Two labels that had competed for supremacy in the South. Two labels that had produced countless classics and helped establish Southern hip-hop as a dominant force in the culture. The event was held at Complex Con. Birdman brought out Juvenile, BG, and Manny Fresh. Master P had his No Limit soldiers. Snoop Dogg made a surprise appearance. The energy was electric. For one night, it felt like New Orleans had won. Like the city's contributions to hip-hop were being celebrated properly. But there was one notable absence from the Cash Money side. Turk wasn't there. And when Birdman took the microphone to shout out the Hot Boys, when he praised Lil Wayne and Juvenile and BG, he saved a different kind of shout out for Turk. He called him a little bitch. He said fuck you. He said they'd deal with him when they wanted to deal with him. Manny Fresh tried to get him back on script, but the damage was done. It was captured on camera. It went viral within hours. Turk responded that same night on Instagram Live. He said No Limit destroyed Cash Money without Lil Wayne there. But more importantly, he started asking questions publicly that cut to the heart of what this was really about. He called out the people who watched Birdman disrespect him and said nothing. He talked about how nobody in the Cash Money family put money in his pocket, how it was promoters who paid him, not label executive. He questioned whether people were being real or just riding with Birdman because they were scared to speak up. And he made a bigger point, one that resonated beyond just this particular beef. He talked about pride and ego. He said that Birdman needed to let his pride go, that if Birdman did that, everyone else would follow. He positioned himself as the only one willing to speak truth to power, the only one not afraid to call out the dynamics that kept people silent when they should be speaking up. What makes this entire situation so compelling is that it's not really about Turk versus Birdman or Turk versus BG, it's about larger questions that have haunted hip-hop since its beginning. What do artists owe the labels that made them famous? What do labels owe the artists who generated the hits? When young kids from rough neighborhoods sign contracts they barely understand, who bears responsibility when those deals turn out to be exploitative? How do you build a legacy when the foundation includes so many people who feel they were cheated? Cash Money Records generates $20 to $30 million a year, just from their masters. According to Birdman, they own the music. They control the revenue streams. Artists who recorded those songs decades ago, during the peak of their careers, often see pennies while the label continues profiting. It's legal, it's business, but it's also created a trail of bitter former artists who feel like they gave their youth and talent to build something they don't benefit from. The timing of Birdman's call-out at Verzuz is particularly interesting because it came right after Turk's very public legal battle with the tour promoters. Turk had already been painted as difficult, as someone causing problems. The security risk narrative had been established, and now here was Birdman, in front of thousands of people, reinforcing that message. Turk's not here. Turk's a problem. Turk gets dealt with on our term. But there's another way to read that moment. Maybe Birdman saw an opportunity to remind everyone who holds the power. Maybe it was about sending a message not just to Turk, but to anyone else who might think about speaking up about money or contracts or respect. This is what happens when you go against the family. This is what happens when you make demands instead of being grateful for whatever you get. The New Orleans hip-hop community watched all of this unfold with mixed feelings. On one hand, Cash Money and No Limit together represent an incredible legacy. They proved that Southern rappers didn't need New York's approval. They created sounds and styles that influenced everyone who came after. They turned local labels into national powerhouses. On the other hand, both labels have long histories of artist disputes, financial controversies, and broken relationships. What Turk's situation highlighted is something that goes beyond just one artist's grievances. It's about power dynamics in the music industry. It's about how young black artists from impoverished backgrounds often sign contracts that benefit labels far more than artists. It's about how loyalty in hip-hop is often a one-way street, where artists are expected to be grateful and silent while executives maintain control and profits. The Hot Boys were once four teenagers from New Orleans who had talent and dreams in each other. They created music that defined an era. They influenced countless artists who came after. But like so many groups in hip-hop history, money and pride and business destroyed what talent and friendship had built. And now, decades later, what should be celebrations of their legacy keep getting overshadowed by beefs and lawsuits and public call-outs. The question hanging over all of this is whether reconciliation is even possible. Can Turk and Birdman ever have a real conversation about respect in business? Can the Hot Boys ever truly reunite without these tensions bubbling up? Or is this just how it goes in hip-hop, where the same industry that creates legends also creates the conditions for those legends to tear each other apart.